For 3 years, a British motorcycle chased Steve McQueen across occupied Germany. Sometimes it was chasing him, sometimes McQueen was riding it. There was no BMW anywhere near that set. That under the hood. The Shelby GT500 that Nicolas Cage risked everything to steal was never a Shelby. Not one of the 12 built for that film carried the name legitimately. And when Francis Ford Coppola needed to destroy a Tucker 48, a car so rare only 51 were ever built, he didn't destroy a Tucker, he destroyed a Studebaker wearing one. 4 films, 4 cars that became cultural landmarks. None of them were what they claimed to be. This is the story of why. The Great Escape, 1963. Steve McQueen plays Captain Virgil Hiltz, an American airman who steals a motorcycle and makes a run for the Swiss border with half the German army behind him. It's the most famous chase sequence of his career, built around a 12-foot jump over barbed wire that's been replayed in documentaries, tribute reels, and motorcycle ads for 6 decades. The bike Hiltz steals is supposed to be German. It isn't. Production needed a period-correct German military motorcycle, something that could plausibly be ridden by Wehrmacht soldiers in 1944. The obvious choice was a BMW R75, the actual motorcycle the German army used during the war. The problem, by 1962, there weren't enough surviving R75s in operable condition to build a chase sequence around. So the production turned to something McQueen already knew intimately, a British 1961 Triumph TR6 Trophy, the same machine he rode when he wasn't on set. 4 Triumphs were prepared for filming. Customizer Von Dutch, working out of stunt coordinator Bud Ekins' shop, stripped away anything that read as British and rebuilt the silhouette to pass as German. Matte olive paint, altered fenders, a flattened seat, repositioned luggage racks. Nobody watching the finished film then or now clocks the difference unless they already know to look for it. Here's where it gets stranger. McQueen was one of the most accomplished off-road motorcyclists in the world, arguably better than most of the stuntmen hired to play the German soldiers chasing him. So for several of the pursuit shots, McQueen put on a German uniform and rode as one of his own pursuers. Watch closely enough, and there are moments in that chase where Steve McQueen is chasing Steve McQueen, one of them dressed as the enemy, both of them riding the same disguised Triumph. He didn't perform the final jump. That went to Ekins, who cleared the fence in a single take and earned a place in the Stuntmen's Hall of Fame for it. McQueen always said so himself, never tried to take credit for the one moment everyone assumes was his. After filming wrapped, one of the 4 Triumphs left Hollywood entirely. It was sold to a farmer in Norfolk, England, who used it exactly the way you'd use any old motorcycle on a farm, to herd cattle. It sat in a barn for years afterward, gathering dust until a restorer named Dick Shepard found it and brought it back. The bike that played a German war machine spent its retirement moving cows. By the time Gone in 60 Seconds hit theaters in 2000, Eleanor wasn't just a car. She was the entire emotional center of the film, the 50th vehicle on a heist list. The one that got away from Nicolas Cage's character years earlier, framed by the script less like a machine and more like an old rival he'd never stopped thinking about. She's introduced as a 1967 Shelby GT500. Metallic pepper gray, black racing stripes, side exit exhaust. If you know Shelby Mustangs even a little, everything about her reads correctly. None of it was real. Production built 12 cars for the role, all of them standard 1967 Mustang fastbacks, not Shelby's, customized with a body kit designed by illustrator Steve Stanford and executed by Chip Foose. 9 were static shells, built for damage and background shots. Only 3 were fully functional, drivable machines, and even those were built around a Ford 351 crate engine rather than anything resembling a genuine Shelby drivetrain. This is a different kind of fake than the others in this story. Nobody involved with production was struggling to locate a real 1967 Shelby GT500. Those existed, and collectors owned them. What the production couldn't do was justify destroying one. Real Shelbys were already expensive, already collectible, already irreplaceable by 2000. Building convincing fakes meant the crew could crash, jump, and total Eleanor as many times as the script demanded without touching an actual piece of automotive history. The fake-out outgrew the real thing almost immediately. Within years, replica builders across the country were constructing their own Eleanors, some meticulous, some rough approximations built mostly around the paint scheme. That popularity became a two-decade legal fight. Denise Halicki, widow of the original 1974 film's writer-director, spent years suing replica builders and even the Shelby Company itself, arguing that Eleanor was a copyrighted character, not just a customized prop. It took a federal appeals court ruling, not a car show, not an auction house, an actual court of law to settle the question. In 2022, the Ninth Circuit determined that Eleanor was legally a movie prop, not a protectable character, closing the door to 2 decades of litigation and freeing Shelby to build its own licensed continuation cars. One of the 3 functioning original Eleanors sold at auction for over $1 million in 2013. It sold again in 2020 for $852,000, still more than a genuine, correctly optioned 1967 Shelby GT500 would command at the same sale. The car built to avoid destroying something valuable became more valuable than the thing it was avoiding. Raiders' way of knowing it. Only 51 Tucker 48s were ever built before Preston Tucker's company collapsed in 1949 under an SEC investigation that later cleared him of wrongdoing. 47 of those cars survive today, and each one that reaches auction commands 7 figures. When Francis Ford Coppola, a Tucker owner himself, set out to make Tucker the man and his dream in 1988, he had a resource most productions could only dream of: access to roughly 22 real Tuckers, borrowed from Coppola's own garage, George Lucas, and members of the Tucker Automobile Club of America. 22 real priceless cars driving through a modern film production. That should have been more authenticity than any movie car story needs. It wasn't enough. For the riskier shots, background vehicles, damage sequences, anything with a real chance of denting an irreplaceable piece of automotive history, the production built 4 fiberglass-bodied replicas, molded directly from Coppola's own Tucker and mounted on 1974 LTD chassis. The replicas retained the donor LTD's brakes, steering, and suspension underneath a shell built to be visually indistinguishable from the real thing at a glance. Then there's the one moment where even a fiberglass replica wasn't disposable enough. The film's rollover crash sequence, the dramatic centerpiece where a Tucker tumbles and wrecks on camera, didn't use a real Tucker, and it didn't use one of the 4 replicas either. Production modified an entirely separate Studebaker and a second Ford LTD to look like a Tucker specifically so it could be destroyed. The car crashing in that scene wasn't playing a real Tucker or a convincing replica. It was a third layer of disguise, built for the sole purpose of being wrecked and then discarded. 3 tiers of real in a single film. Genuine Tuckers worth millions, fiberglass replicas built to survive being driven, and a disposable stand-in built to survive nothing at all. The surviving replicas didn't disappear after filming. One was donated to the Ypsilanti Automotive Heritage Museum in Michigan before eventually passing into private hands and selling at auction for $100,000, a non-functional fiberglass shell with a Ford LTD underneath, selling for the price of a genuine well-optioned classic muscle car purely because of what it pretended to be for 2 hours of screen time. None of these vehicles were built to fool an audience for the sake of fooling them. Nobody set out to deceive anyone watching. Every disguise in this story exists because the real thing was gone. Too rare, too expensive to risk, or too dangerous to destroy was the workaround. And in every case, the workaround outlasted the reason it was built. Sitting in a Disneyland queue line, herding cattle in an English farm, or selling at auction for 6 figures as a car that was never, technically, a car at all.